Yeah, anyway, I figured it was going to be an incredibly tough game, and I started with my usual d4, c4. Black played knight f6, e6. I go knight f3 here because I don't really like facing the Nimzo. D5. And he's actually played a lot of Benoni as well, but in this game he chose d5. I went knight c3, and now he played knight bd7. Black has a lot of moves in this position, like c6 is semi-Slav, bishop e7, bishop b4 is Rogozin, bishop e7 is like QGD, dc4, Vienna, like all these moves are playable. c5, semi-Tarosh, also playable. Knight d7 is also playable. I don't know the exact name of this one, but it can transpose into like a Cambridge Springs semi-Slav if white goes bishop g5, c6, e3, then black plays queen a5 here and we get into the Cambridge Springs variation. But I know white has other options as well, but I basically wasn't prepared for this one at all. It was a total surprise for me. And I recall, I had one game years ago where I played bishop f4 in this position, and then after dc4, I had problems getting the pawn back because black has this like knight d5 move, and then the bishop on f4 gets hit. So it was kind of, this position wasn't really fun. I think there's theory here, but yeah, it was already kind of difficult for white. So I knew either white should choose between bishop g5 or taking first, and then playing one of these two moves, like either bishop g5 or bishop f4, as far as I understood, are both playable. And we get a very typical Queen's Gambit decline, except it's just a little bit funny with the move order, because black is starting with early knight d7, delaying bishop e7, and maybe black can try out different stuff, so we don't just get into like the classic exchange QGD. So I ended up playing bishop f4, just because I felt like I had looked at this, and to me this seemed very, very reasonable, or at least I remembered it being very reasonable, so I decided just to play it. Bishop g5 also, I think, totally playable here, but okay, bishop f4 made sense to me, and I just want to develop like e3, bishop d3, etc. with a normal position. Black played c6, and now I played h3, and yeah, this was definitely like something that I kind of half remembered looking at. Like I remember thinking, or always being worried about like e3 knight h5 in this kind of position. And a lot of times black does this, and I can go bishop g5 here, but then just bishop e7, and this is actually like a theoretical position, but white is a tempo down because instead of the bishop being on g5, we played bishop f4 and then bishop g5. So, I mean, this I think is totally playable, but didn't really make sense to me to go into this. And I knew h3 was kind of an idea in these positions, so I decided to try it. And it's a very ambitious move because now I'm basically killing any kind of ideas of knight h5, and because the bishop can retreat, of course. And now if I get e3 in and bishop d3 and castles, then okay, white just has like a totally normal setup, and there hasn't been much point to like black hasn't really achieved much through their move order. So I think white just kind of gets like almost like a dream position in the QGD, just like everything set up right where it needs to go, and black hasn't really achieved anything special. So I felt like he might start like, trying to create something here, and basically he does. He goes for knight e4, which I certainly felt was possible. And now black is just trying to go like bishop b4, queen a5, and play for this counterplay. And it actually is quite unpleasant. Like I think knight e4 is actually a very strong move because, yeah, basically black has a lot of play happening here with bishop b4, queen a5. If I play like queen c2, rook c1, like typical defense, a2 pawn will always be hanging, and I don't know, kind of unclear. So I thought for a while here, and ended up playing e3. I didn't want to take on e4 because then after de just feels like the knight doesn't have a great square to jump to. So I played. I wanted to start with e3, and yeah, main thing I was worried about here, of course, is all these pinning moves. He ends up going queen a5, but my idea was to play queen b3. And then the point is I'm defending the a2 pawn, and then the rook can come to c1, and it seemed like I'm actually defending everything. And I want to go bishop d3, castles. Just if I can just develop, then without losing something or allowing some counterplay, then again, I think white's position is absolutely fine, and eventually black is going to have to start going back because I'm going to play a3 at some point, and yeah, it's not clear what black is doing. So here he castles, and then I went bishop d3. And yeah, I was expecting something like knight f6, and to me, I thought I'm totally okay, like castles, bishop f5. I thought I have a lot of moves here, like rook fd1, for example, or maybe even knight h4 might be possible. So I was kind of expecting something like this. And then I realized while he was thinking that, like, oh, he can play c5 here, and c5 is actually like super annoying. And yeah, I like totally blanked on this move. And as he was thinking about it, he started spending lots of time. Like I started thinking about this, and yeah, it just looked like a very, very annoying move because now black is starting to play c4. And if I take the d5 pawn, then c3 starts hanging. And specifically, black can play like bishop takes c3, takes, knight takes c3. And this looked very, very, very bad for white because the queen is hanging, black is starting knight takes a2, winning the rook. You know, I have some queen h5 tempos, but there's always knight f6 in response. So this just seemed like might just be losing on the spot for white. At least it didn't look great. So yeah. Oh, question, why not start with a3 instead of bishop d3? Well, you know, I just wanted to develop faster. So if I can avoid playing a3, then, you know, I'm kind of like saving a tempo because I'd rather just castle first and then I'll play a3 later on. Yeah, this is definitely an option as well. And then my guess is we would probably get something like this, because if knight takes, then there's a takes b4, and I don't think this this works for black. So let's say bishop takes here, and yeah, it makes sense. I mean, white gets the two bishops, black will try to create some play because white's king is still in the center. So yeah, it's definitely playable, but it's still kind of double-edged. Like black might go for like b6, bishop a6 ideas, try to trade off like the light square bishops, and then we lose the bishop pair, and then our structure might be kind of weak. So you always have to be kind of careful. So I just wasn't sure about something like this. By all means could be the best move. But yeah, that's why I played bishop d3. And okay, now I get hit with c5, and now it's kind of a problem. And now it's actually too late to play a3, because then black is just taking with check and playing c4 and winning a piece. So yeah, I realized, like, okay, the only thing I can do here is bishop takes e4. So now I have to give up the bishop, which I wasn't super happy about, but after knight d2, I also felt like my position's kind of okay. Like I didn't think white is necessarily worse. At first I was unhappy, but the more I looked at it, the more I felt like white might actually be okay, because the knight wants to jump to c4, and it's going to be hard for black to keep the bishop pair anyway, because we're going to get a3 in. So I thought maybe this is actually quite all right. Now black takes on d4. I recaptured. I did think about throwing in knight c4 here, but then black can actually just take on c3. And if I take on a5, c takes b2. And I think white is just losing here, because if queen takes bishop, black is promoting, and if king d1 or king e2 or something, black makes a queen, and then takes on a5, and then has 3 pieces for the queen, which is way too many. And so black would be totally winning here. Rook and 2 pieces, so not even 3 minor pieces, but rook and 2 pieces. So that one I can't avoid. I can also just play bc here, but then minimum black can take, queen takes, and then go for something like this. And I mean, I'm a pawn down, and maybe I have like enough compensation here, but you know, white is definitely, I didn't think white could really be better here. And it just seemed like I'd be just kind of fighting for a draw in this position. So it didn't really make sense to go for that. So I just recapture, e takes d4. Because I have some upside too. I have like knight c4, and then maybe my knight can jump to e3, and that's kind of a nice square. And then this d pawn can be an asset as well, possibly. So knight f6, knight c4, bishop takes c3, bc, queen f5. And yeah, now white has to be like really, really precise here because black is of course hitting the bishop and threatening stuff like bishop e6 and rook c8. And if bishop e6 happens, it's very annoying. It's just gonna take a lot of time. It's gonna be very uncomfortable to kind of unpin. So I think leading up to this moment, I'd already realized I needed to play bishop d6 here because I need a tempo against the rook so that I can play knight e3 again with tempo and then save the bishop. So like rook d8, for example, the idea is to go knight e3, queen moves somewhere, let's say queen g6, and then bishop can drop back to g3. And now I think white just gets a very, very nice setup because I can now play like c4 d5 or d5 first, then c4. I can castle, bring the rook to the center, and I feel like white's pieces are placed really, really ideally. And it's a very interesting structure. It's like hanging pawns, but black has this pawn on e4 advanced rather than like back on e6. So it's really felt like a double-edged position, but I felt like if I can get this set up, then I was quite happy. So bishop d6, black ends up going rook e8. Now knight e3. And again, if I didn't do this, then I get hit with bishop e6 with the knight on c4. It'd be really uncomfortable. And yeah, earlier I put the bishop on g3 because with the like queen on g6, queen to g6 was played, and actually I just dropped back bishop g3. The bishop can also go to e5. It's just that I want a castle here, and I'm worried about bishop takes h3. So yeah, the bishop goes here just kind of prophylactically. And now this does allow knight h5, which is kind of an annoying move. And I was really expecting this one, but the idea was to just castle. And if takes, I'm hitting f7 because the rook opens up, so black isn't able to take on g3. But black can play bishop e6. Actually, I wasn't clear about this during the game at all on what's going on here because bishop e6 first and then queen takes g3. But it turns out white is in time. Like I can take, and take this one. And if black plays bishop takes h3, then there's queen f3, which is kind of very nice saving move. The engine pointed this out. I didn't see this during the game, so I really wasn't sure about all this. But I checked this moment, and yeah, this one is like, I mean, it's a very nice find, right? Because if rook takes e3, then we have queen takes, and we have the millennial back rank trick. But otherwise, if black trades queens, then we take with the rook, and it's just like a fantastic endgame for white because we have two protected passers that are immediately pushing forward, and yeah, black has to lose time bringing the bishop back, and white is just immediately running straight ahead. So this is just a very, very nice endgame for white. But yeah, I wasn't really sure if I was gonna find all this during the game because I was just kind of very unclear about it. But yeah, I didn't want to put the bishop on e5 because then it was just like, how am I gonna castle with bishop takes h3 always hanging? So bishop g3, black goes b6 because if bishop e6, then I'm going to take on b7. And once I take this pawn, it's actually very important because then I get, again, two connected pass pawns that become very, very strong. So if the pawns start pushing forward, then white just is going to have a decisive advantage. So b6 first, I castle, bishop e6, and yeah, really tricky move. I realized this was a critical moment because I actually have a choice here. I can either push d5 immediately, which seems to make sense, right? Just why not take the tempo? Or white can play c4 and then play d5 after. And I wasn't sure. I mean, intuitively, I felt like, well, you know, I should go d5 because why not just take the tempo now and then black moves the bishop, like bishop d7, and then I'll go c4. But then I realized his idea is that he wants to go knight h5, and hitting the bishop. I want to react to this move with king h2. If black takes fg, this is like a really nice structure for white. I really like this one because I get the f file and the knight is just like a perfect blockader. This felt very, very pleasant to play. But instead, of course, black is going to go f5 and then create this counterplay with f4. And so this felt super annoying. And so I realized actually if in this position my pawn was still on d4 and I could play bishop e5, then actually the counterplay is not as strong. So somehow I got clued into exactly the right detail here. So I end up going c4, knight h5, king h2, f5, bishop e5. And this ends up making a huge difference because now f4 isn't nearly as dangerous, and of course my bishop is a lot stronger on e5. And now after f4, I have knight d5. I was also kind of considering this one, but this is a pawn sack, and it didn't seem 100% clear to me. Like, I thought maybe I'm getting some compensation here because I felt like my king is going to be active and black's knight is weird and bishop is strong and etc. But I wasn't sure if I really have enough. But once I saw knight d5, this just appealed to me so much more. I mean, I don't give up a pawn. The knight threatens c7 and also f4. And if bishop takes d5, c takes d5, then the rook gets the c7 square. I get d6. All of a sudden, my play is just completely flowing here, right? All the pieces feel very, very coordinated. This g7 pawn is a huge target. And black's play here with like f3, actually, there's not that many threats white has to deal with. It's just like a bunch of ways. You can go rook g1, can go g3, or even g4 in some positions. Black doesn't actually have a ton of mating threats. So I was looking at stuff here, like it was definitely calculating like takes, and like rook takes e5, for example, because I thought, okay, maybe black sacks the exchange and gets something with f3, but I don't think any of it was really working. I was also calculating here, maybe instead of taking the rook, I can just go d6 check and just be super devious with the d pawn. So like if queen e6, then okay, we take the rook because now we're trading the queens off. But if rook e6, then d7, threatening rook c8, and the rook is pinned. And on any move, we're just going rook c8, king f7, rook c8, rook d8, rook c8. And I didn't see how black defends this, because only way to guard the rook is to do it with the queen, but then we take, and rook on e6 is hanging. So this looked good to me, but I also probably felt like I can just take, and I didn't actually see how I'm getting mated in this position either, but okay, that was just a nice line I calculated. So once I saw all this, I felt like, wow, actually my position looks really nice. Because knight c7 is a huge problem, f4 pawn is hanging. I should also mention at this point, my opponent was definitely already in pretty heavy time trouble. Like I think he's under 10 minutes at this point, and it's move 24. So 15 moves until a time control. He does get the 30-second increment, but it's not really a lot in such a sharp position. But he's also extremely, extremely strong and good with not having a lot of time on the clock. So I was definitely trying to keep my full focus here. But it was nice that I didn't spend a ton of time. I didn't burn a bunch of time. I just kind of made my decisions. And so at this point, I'm still having like 30 or 40 minutes on the clock. So I'm like very, very comfortably ahead. And I definitely had to use it in the remaining portion of the first time control. So he goes f3. And yeah, here I felt actually, at first I just wanted to take this one because, again, I didn't see black's attack really succeeding here. Queen f5 is kind of the only scary move, but then I can just take on e4. Cover that one, and then if queen takes e4, it seemed like, okay, my king is a little open, but black doesn't really have any serious threat. So maybe knight c7 here. I can maybe throw in rook e1 might be better. I felt like this should be totally fine. Somehow, I don't know, I decided against it, and I ended up playing rook g1, which I also just felt was good. And just intuitively, I felt like this move was maybe a little bit safer, a little bit cleaner, because now if black takes, I'm just going to recapture with the rook. I'm also threatening to take, and my rook is on the g file. And if queen f5, then the idea would be to go g4. And I was pretty sure I can just do this and, yeah, just take the piece once the queen moves. And then rook comes to g3 and defends the h-pawn. So something like this, and it seemed like white is perfectly safe. Instead, queen g5 happens. And yeah, it seemed like, okay, black is intending either like queen h4 or queen d2, but none of this really looked fatal. Again, I considered this one, and then queen h4 just to take here. And if black takes on f2 with check, okay, rook g2, and my king is actually totally covered. Knight c7 might be my next move. Also, there's like tactics against the g7 pawn. Right, if queen takes e4 here with the rook on g1, I think I noticed this one, which is kind of a nice little trick. And then knight takes g7, knight f6, and We win the queen. So I kind of like this. Eventually I disliked it because of rook f8 here. And okay, maybe black tries to take on f2. Now, okay, I didn't like the sight of black's rook getting active. I considered the move f4, but I just felt like it's it's just kind of asking to get mated somehow. But I didn't concretely see what's actually wrong with it. It's just, yeah, felt loose at the time. So instead, I end up just playing knight c7. I'm like, you know what? I have knight c7. There's a fork here. Black doesn't have any serious threats. Why not just do it? I think it's just time to start taking material. I think it was a good decision because, okay, f takes g2. Now, yeah, okay, another critical moment. I could take on e8, I could take on a8. Honestly, both make sense. Like, it makes sense to take on a8 so that the rook is distracted. But at the same time, I was also a little bit worried that he's just going to go like rook f8 and then rook f3. And so this started to look a little bit annoying, although it's probably fine because of like rook c3, for example. So I was also considering maybe I should take this one just to make sure he has to spend a tempo here before his rook gets into the game. But then I was like, well, I don't know. I also considered taking here just to take his bishop, and then rook takes e6, c5. Then king f7 I figured, and it seemed like it should be a good position, but I wasn't like 100% sure. Like takes, rook c6, for example, rook e8, and I didn't see exactly how I'm winning here. And I haven't actually won any material yet, so there's a chance things simplify, and then I'm not really left with a winning advantage. Because at this point, I was definitely feeling very, very confident about my chances and trying just to win. So yeah, I end up doing this one, and I like it because, okay, I just keep everything under attack. I stop black from being able to play rook f8 because now I just take on e6 and everything is lost. So I felt like this was just kind of the best of all worlds. And I kind of cover any counterplay on the third rank. So now bishop f7 is played. And I think at this point he kind of realized, okay, the attack is just not going to be successful. And he starts kind of like remaneuvering and playing for just kind of like a fortress, which ended up being like very, very hard to crack. So knight takes a8, rook takes a8. I take here, queen f5. And at this point, yeah, I'm starting to kind of approach time trouble. But I definitely felt like I should be winning. I'm up the exchange, and I felt like my pieces are quite reasonable. So I played queen d1. The idea is to go queen g4, just force the queen trade. But rook e8, very tricky actually. So now if queen g4, he has rook takes e5. And if takes, at first I thought, well, hold on, maybe I can go for this, right? Because this rook is lost, but if I go king g1, I have queen c8 check. But then I realized I think he has bishop e6, and I didn't have a ton of time to like fully look at this. Like it might still be winning for white after some accurate move, like queen g5 or something, but I have no way of defending the rook, and yeah, I was worried I'm not going to be up in exchange in the eventual position. So this felt very unclear to me. So I decided just to go queen to d2 because I just don't have a lot of time. I think I'm down to like 10 minutes at this point. So I really have to be pretty quick, and we have about 10 moves to go to the time control. So queen d2, intending to go queen g5, also defending the rook. So rook takes c5 is not a thing. Bishop g6. I drop back bishop g3. Now it's just I didn't want to have my bishop dangling, so I decided to kind of cover my king. And then if knight takes g3, I can just recapture, and I think I'm happy to simplify the position. Instead, he went knight f6. Now I played queen f4. And my idea here is, okay, I'm either trying to trade queens or just push my pawns. That's how I felt like I can win this game. So queen f4, queen a5. I missed this move. I was like, oh shoot, the rook is under attack, pawn is hanging. If rook c2, then there's like e3. And if queen d2, there's also e3, which was just like, oh my god, imagine if this happens. And I can't take with the rook because the queen is hanging. If I take with the pawn, there's like knight e4. So I was like, oh no. So I was like, okay, we got to be super, super careful here. So I play queen c1, and he takes on a2 very quickly. Because why not? I mean, he's lost, so might as well take a pawn, and okay, maybe his a pawn can one day do something, just playing for whatever chance he can get. I push d5 here, queen a4, d6. I'm sure this part of the game, I did not play well. I feel like earlier I probably had a chance for a much, much bigger advantage. I actually haven't checked a lot of this with the engine, so I don't really know what it says, but I felt like I was winning, but yeah, I definitely likely had a lot better that I could have done. But okay, during the time trouble, it's very, very hard to play accurately, but I am happy with how I handled it overall because I don't think I gave him a lot of chances to save the game. At least not that I can really think of. Maybe the engine will show something. But during the game, I felt in control for pretty much the whole time. So c5, just opening the c file. Takes. And now I'm trying to get rook c7 in and just trying to break the blockade. And I was a little bit worried that he's going to start setting up, put the knight on d7 and stuff and maybe try to hold that. But I actually feel like with the opposite color bishops, a lot of times this gives more chances for, not for the blockading side, but for like the stronger side. I don't know, I could be wrong about that, but I feel like it's kind of nice having the opposite color bishops here. So queen e6. And yeah, here I decide, this is move 39, so this is kind of my final time pressure thing. I think I still have like maybe 4 or 5 minutes here. I decided to go rook e5. Of course, he can't take the pawn because rook takes c8, queen d7. Because I just want to trade rooks. I mean, this is kind of the principle. When you have an extra exchange, you should try to simplify and especially trade black's or the defender's rook off so that they have less counterplay. But I also liked this one, queen c7. So not trading yet and just kind of putting maximum pressure. And so my idea was just to try to trade everything off and maybe get some kind of rook and bishop versus bishop and knight endgame, which I felt like should be winning if I can hold the d6 pawn. Now here I'm kind of setting a trap. If queen takes c7, then I would actually first throw this one in, and then on knight takes dc. This is just, I think, immediately over. Like black can stop the pawn, but there's like no chance for a blockade. The rook is just gonna come in, or rook d1, rook d8, probably the cleanest, and yeah, black is just not in time here. Something like this, and yeah, next just rook a8, and the pawn will promote. So black is a little bit stuck, but he ends up playing bishop f5, and now this is move 40, and yeah, at this point I spent a bunch of time trying to figure out what to do because I felt like, okay, I can trade everything. I can go like rook takes c8, knight takes c8, queen takes d7, bishop takes d7. Like I wasn't totally sure, like I wasn't 100% sure I'm winning that endgame because the king will come very quickly, I thought, like come in and, black is just blockading this d6 pawn. I really wasn't sure. So I was looking for other moves. I was looking for ways maybe to keep the queens on, like maybe queen c5, maybe bishop f4. I consider like bishop h4 as well. I also looked at this one. I was really hoping this would work to make my life easy because I'm hitting this and this one as well. But I think black just has g6, and I couldn't actually find a win here. Like I can take and push, but then rook d8, and my rook is kind of misplaced, and f2 is under attack, so this didn't look clear at all. And yeah, I considered rook e7 as well, but then I didn't like that black can take this way. And then I actually thought with the pawn on e7, it's not really in my favor because the king can immediately join in, and yeah, black is just blockading the pawn very easily. For all I know, this is still winning. It made more sense that I would rather have the pawn be over here somewhere on the queen side so that the king isn't able to both defend the king side and stop the pawn. which I don't know, maybe this is still good, maybe there's a way to break through, but like bishop e5 here, for example, looks interesting, but it's really hard to say. But yeah, during the game, I'd rather just keep the pawn on d6. Eventually, I went a little bit deeper into this position, and I actually found like a really nice plan that to me seemed super clean. So I was like reasonably happy with my technique here. I very much felt like Endgame Sensei. So I do take, and I take this one. And then I came up with this plan to go bishop f4. And the idea is that I'm just trying to swing the rook to g5, e5, and e7 as quickly as possible. And that's how I realized I can actually just break the blockade. If knight comes to f6 at any point, then just bishop e5, and the knight can't really stay on f6. And the king is not really in time either, because on king e6, I have rook e5 check. So this is kind of a very important trick. King can't take because rook takes c8, which just wins the piece. And if the king has to go back, well then rook e7 and the blockade is like totally collapsing. And I also realized that like any kind of position like this, even if black is able to set up like king e6, bishop d7, knight f6, whatever black wants to do, I always felt like white is going to be able to break it because number one, it's really hard for black to ever take the pawn. Like for example, there's okay, I was considering one line here, like a5, rook here, a4, rook e5, and then if black wants to prevent white from just immediately winning, they gotta kind of ditch the a pawn, so something like this. Then king f7, I take king e6. So I was thinking like even in this position, black is never threatening to play knight takes d6 because there's always rook a6. And of course I can always also just play rook a6, but also means like my rook has freedom. I can play, like I can go after this pawn, I can start moving my king around. And yeah, if the opponent has no counterplay, something like this, then basically I think it's almost always going to be working. And I also have the plan rook a5 and then back to e5. And there's not really a whole lot black can do about this one. Or maybe there is, but it would allow something else that white can do. So yeah, I'm glad I kind of took a longer look at this one because I realized like actually is at first I thought, ooh, I don't know if I can win this, you know, he's going to hold it. And generally I'm very skeptical about my own chances to convert endgames like this against strong players because I just not super confident in the technique and I just feel like, oh, they're going to find some fortress or find some blockade. Yeah, the more I looked at it, the more I just felt like, nah, it looks like I'm breaking through. So yeah, he ends up going a6. I'm not really sure what the best try was, but I think white is winning. I played here, knight f6, rook e5, bishop c6. I put the rook on e7. And okay, this move definitely required some calculation because on knight d5, you have to see that you can take on e4, and black doesn't really have any tricks there. But with rook e7, very important move. Now I'm threatening bishop e5, and that's a very painful idea for black because if the knight moves away, then g7 falls. And if white is able to take on f6 and get just like pure rook versus bishop endgame, it kind of depends. I don't think you can do it no matter what, but if the king is cut off and we're just getting like rook c7 and d7 immediately, then okay, it's just going to be winning by force. So any kind of bishop or knight trade I felt like should be good for white as long as black isn't just immediately like picking up the d6 pawn. Okay, so he goes knight d5 because what else? Rook c7 is coming next, and then bishop e5 or bishop e5 right away. So knight d5, I take, king f7, and yeah, I think I found a nice kind of schematic here with bishop d2. And basically my point is that I'm just keeping the king cut off, which I felt was very important, not to let the king help out. And my bishop is kind of dominating the knight, and I also want to put the bishop on a5, so I stop the a pawn from running. And the bishop on a5, I'm like supporting the d pawn, because then there's always going to be tactics like rook e5, and then takes d7. With the bishop on a5, black can't stop the pawn anymore. So I like this idea. King f6 was played, bishop a5, king f5, rook e1, and yeah, black just can't really do a whole lot. Black is just kind of trying to hold on to the blockade. But slowly it just kind of breaks down. So king g3, I didn't have like an immediate way to break through, because any kind of rook c1 or anything, it's always king e6 or king e6, and I definitely don't want to allow that move. But I just start kind of improving the king. And black doesn't really have a lot of moves that he can make. So g6, f3, h5, h4, king f6, and now I played bishop d8 check. And the point of this one is actually to force the king to kind of decide either f5 or f7. On king f5, I was kind of thinking I would play here, and then maybe f4, and rook e5 is an idea where black just gets mated. I'm not sure if this 100% works. It looks pretty strong though. I was also considering ideas like, I just want to make sure I get this right. So ideas like f4 immediately. Not sure if I was thinking about it in this position, but this was one option. I can also try to set this up. The point being, I want to go rook e5, and this just wins on the spot. And if knight takes here, then I would push d7. Yeah, I don't think it works in this position because there's knight e6, but I think I would have to bring my bishop back first, and then maybe f4, or like if the bishop was on a5, and then I could push d7. Basically, the idea would be to push d7 at a point where black has to take, and then after takes rook f1, the knight would be lost. So white would be rook up and winning. But it would have to be at a point where my bishop is elsewhere. So that knight e6, I could just play rook takes e6, and then the pawn promotes as well. Anyway, so that was just some idea I was trying to set up. Black ends up going king f7, but this allows me to come in with rook to e5. And now it's basically over, because threatening just to end the blockade. And if bishop c6, then my trick was to go d7 here, which I thought was kind of fancy. Of course, bishop can't take because the knight would be lost. And my threat is just to move the bishop and promote the pawn. And unfortunately for black, there's nowhere to move the knight that is safe. So like black can move the knight and try to take the pawn, but I always have like bishop a5, for example here, or rook c5 I think also works. If this one, then there's this again, and so this is kind of the point, and black isn't able to both save the knight and stop the pawn. So black played knight f6, but now this allows me just to trade off. King takes f6, and yeah, this endgame I felt was just winning for white, because black's king is cut off after either king f4 or f4, and the d6 pawn is just way too strong. Now I played king f4, but actually I was kicking myself a little bit because I think f4 would have been so much easier, and I think black just resigns if I play this move here, because black just has literally no counterplay, and my king is just running to the queen side, and there's just nothing that black can do. So the king just runs to c5, b6, c7, I push, and the rook is defended, the rook is cutting off the king, and it's just completely game over. So a bit unfortunate that I didn't play this one. Somehow I played king f4. Once again, we're back into time trouble, like, you know, after the time control was reached. This one is still good enough. It just makes my life a little bit harder, because now bishop c6, and in order to bring my king in, I have to go rook e7. Here black played bishop b5. I played king e3. And I basically just have to revert to the previous plan. Of course, black can't play like king f5 or anything right now, because then I'm just pushing the pawn. But once the one risk I have of not winning the game is once I bring my king in and force black to give up the bishop for the pawn, is that maybe black's king gets super active on the king side. And yeah, if I'm left with one of these endgames with like rook versus, you know, one h pawn, those can be very, very tricky, and those can be drawn if we're down, you know, a lot of time. So this was just kind of like the one thing I have to avoid, is not allowing black a ton of counterplay on the king side. But I managed, you know, I just play f4 here, then I play king d4, and king c5, and now I play rook e5, and now the king is totally cut off. I thought black could, you know, maybe make my life a little bit more difficult with like pushing a5 here, just trying to run the pawn, and again, the point would be to distract the king long enough to get counterplay, but it's not really in time, so I don't think it would have changed much. Like I can play here, a4, f4, and then on a3, I'm actually just in time here to go king d4, a2, rook a7, rook comes to stop the pawn, and then king e6, we have king c5, and yeah, I think it's just winning for white. Like, we're going to pick up the a pawn soon. If bishop d5, then there's just d7, and so yeah, this would be winning for white. It'd be a little bit tricky to calculate, but I was already seeing that I'm kind of in time. I can also just play king d4 here without f4. And then if bishop takes f3, this one is also winning for white. Not as easy, but this one would also be fine. But I'd probably just go for this f4 plan and just get the rook behind, get the king to c5, and that's game over. Anyway, this was the game. After rook e5, he resigned because now there's just no chance for any kind of counterplay. Again, if I just kind of run in with king b6, king c7, and then, you know, push d7 somewhere, one day he takes with the bishop, he goes king f5, takes, king, you know, g5, king g4, and there can be some counterplay. But yeah, after rook e5, basically the king is totally cut, and nothing black can do to stop this plan. So yeah, that was the game. You know, definitely, I'm sure I made like a ton of mistakes throughout, but overall I felt really happy after the opening with how I played the middle game. Like finding all this stuff with like bishop d6 and then knight e3, and figuring out this moment like with c4 versus d5, so that on knight h5 and f5 I have bishop e5 here and knight d5. Like, I felt like this was all really, really strong. And yeah, I also was pretty happy with my technique in the endgame, because I felt like it was actually very smooth. Like, I traded rooks, I traded queens, and black never had any kind of counterplay in the game, and I ended up, you know, converting without too many huge issues in the end. So yeah, I normally don't have great technique in such games, especially against strong players. I feel like they often find ways to like mix it up, and I'm not able to handle the complications so well. But I felt really, really good about this one. So that takes me to 4.5 out of 5 in the tournament, and at this point I was tied for first with Grandmaster Belarus.